Hi, I'm Ron Spurnberg, co-founder and CEO of Hi Mama. Welcome to our podcast about all things early childhood education. In this week's episode, we talk about how early childhood educators can create an environment that is inclusive for all families, including LGBTQ or rainbow families. We delve into why visibility of LGBTQ families is important in the preschool context, how educators can promote inclusivity in their curriculum, and how best to communicate diversity with all families in your program. Our guest, Shelleys Secrett, has been an early childhood educator for over 12 years and is currently an ECE at Emmanuel at Brighton Childcare Centre in Waterloo, Ontario. She is also the owner of Secrett Events, which helps organize nonprofit events highlighting local talent, people, and shared experiences to bring community together. To learn more about having an inclusive environment in your preschool and working with LGBTQ families, stay tuned for this week's episode of the Preschool Podcast. Shelley, welcome to the Preschool Podcast. So great to have you on the show. Let's start off just learning a little bit more about how you got into early childhood education and why you're passionate about this field.
Sure, Ron. Thanks. Actually, I used to be an accountant. Can you believe that? And I was looking to make a career change, and I had always loved children, but kind of way back from high school when I was considering getting into this field, people always said, oh, that doesn't make enough money. But really, when I look at it, in my heart of hearts, I just knew that working with children is absolutely where my passion lies. And I just feel like every single day you can make a difference with them. And it's been true that every single day of my career, I have absolutely loved it. So I know I'm in the right place.
Awesome. And one of the things that you really support and get behind is visibility of LGBTQ families in the early learning environment. Two questions for you. First of all, can you just clarify what LGBTQ stands for our audience? And then why do you think that that's so important for early childhood education?
Absolutely. So the acronym LGBTQ stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and queer or questioning. Okay. The acronym actually is a lot longer these days because many new terms are being added quite frequently just to increase the inclusivity of the various genders that are coming about and the many different ways that people are defining themselves. So, but LGBTQ is the common acronym.
Got it.
And so you asked as well, why do I think visibility is so important? I think that especially in the early years, so even before school, I think children really their perceptions of LGBTQ people are learned much earlier even than school age. And so I think it's the responsibility of early childhood educators or anyone working in early learning environments just to teach that there are so many ways that we are different and also ways that we are the same, and just start planting those seeds of acceptance earlier in life will hopefully make children even more accepting when they get into the school age system. I also think that creating visibility in early learning environments, it sends a strong message to anyone, any families hesitating when approaching our services, whether or not, just knowing whether or not they would be welcome there. And I really believe that all families should be honored and recognized as well in the classroom environment.
So even if you don't necessarily know if you have any existing or prospective families that are LGBTQ, like you said, maybe you're showing a family a tour of your childcare program and they happen to be part of that community, you want them to see that you're addressing that topic.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not just for someone who identifies as LGBTQ, it's also for absolutely anybody. Anyone seeing visibility of this kind of family is going to put it together that, wow, this is a center that cares about diversity. And if they care about this kind of diversity, then they probably care about all kinds of diversity, which is so important. This is just one aspect of diversity that I happen to have a passion for. But definitely, whether or not you think you have someone in your center, this may actually help a youth in your program later in life, knowing, you know what, I got messages very early, even in my preschool years, that what I am is okay. And if we can plant those seeds now, what a beautiful thing later for children as they get older and figuring out who they are.
Very good point. Now, one of the things I'm sure you probably hear as a question when you're doing workshops or sessions about this topic is, what if parents are going to be upset? Maybe they think it's too early to bring up this subject with their children at a certain age. What's the response to that?
Mm-hmm. I think when parents approach a child care, looking whether or not they're going to enroll their child, there's a parent handbook, and in every child care, they would have a mission statement. And part of that mission statement is going to include the fact that they celebrate all kinds of diversity. That's a very common phrasing. And so they would already know at the time of enrollment that all kinds of diversity would be celebrated, and that we follow the Canadian Charter of Human Rights. And this is the law. We're not asking anyone to change their own beliefs, but knowing that they have brought their child to an organization that supports all kinds of diversity, then that is just something that would be expected that we would be teaching in our classrooms.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it almost speaks to who we are as Canadians more broadly, but when I listen to you explain it.
Exactly. And can I just add something in there? We are living in Canada and do follow that Canadian Charter of Human Rights. So speaking of rights, children have the right to an inclusive education that is free from discrimination. So we do teach the children about respecting diversity and valuing everybody. So I think that's a beautiful part about being in Canada as well.
Totally. Now, that's from the parents' perspective. Now, what about from the early childhood educator's perspective? Because, what you're saying to me makes sense. And if I'm an early childhood educator listening to this podcast, I'm thinking to myself, yeah, this makes sense. I would want to do this as well, but I don't really know too much about this topic, and I kind of feel a little bit uncomfortable with it as well. Is there anything that administrators or supervisors can do to support them in bringing up these topics or these themes?
Absolutely. I think the greatest way really is providing LGBTQ training, and a lot of centers wouldn't even know perhaps how to get started with that. But I think I would advise centers to start by contacting their city's Pride Committee if they have a Pride Festival happening, because often the Pride Festival is very well connected with other LGBTQ organizations, and that can at least they can at least give some ideas of who to contact and where training could be found. And training could be as simple as having people understand the current terminology, because like I mentioned earlier, the terminology is changing all the time. And I think administrators could also include through the training just some case scenarios, like what to do if, or how do you handle different situations, such as something as simple as Mother's Day or Father's Day. This training could also include about not making assumptions about who has entered your center. You could see a new family come in and you think, oh, great, we have a family with two moms, but really they don't identify as moms. One may be a transgendered man, and some of this training will actually help educators to approach the family and say, let me just tell you this, Ron, people would much rather in the LGBTQ community, they would much rather that you approach them with your questions than just to ignore it and sweep it under a rug.
Right.
If you're wondering, well, how does your child call you, by mom or mama or whatever it may be, they want to have the questions asked so that they can then have their family reflected properly within the center. So a lot of training can help with getting those conversations started and creating a little more comfort around it.
And I think that actually aligns very much to one of the key themes of this podcast, which is leadership in early childhood education. And that's kind of what I'm hearing a little bit is if you've met a prospective family and you're not sure, is to take that leadership role and ask those questions and maybe step out of your comfort zone to have those conversations. And especially if that's going to be the preference of people coming in who are part of that community, to have that conversation as opposed to sweep it under the rug, as you say. So that's a really good point too. Now, let's say I'm an early childhood educator. I'm now a little bit more comfortable with the idea of bringing this theme into my programs. Any ideas on how I would actually go about doing that?
Absolutely. Now, I run a workshop that is called Rainbow Families, Visibility in the Early Years. And I think one of the easiest ways for early childhood educators is through using children's books. That's a good foundation. And having not just one or two books in your center, but having a shelf, let's say a shelf of books, some variety. Actually, yeah, some of my favorite books I've used are Donovan's Big Day, for instance. And this book is so beautiful because it takes the day of a boy getting ready for a big event. And you don't know what the event is going to be until the very end of the book, when it shows that his two moms are getting married. And why I love this kind of book is it's not about, okay, today we're going to talk about gay families. This is just an ordinary boy's life. This is his life. This is his story. And, it should be a lot more subtle in books rather than today we're going to have a discussion about. This book can be alongside any other book about just any other kind of family as well. And these books should not just come out once a month or even once a year when it's Pride season. No, these books should be on our shelves at all times. So there's many different books out there. All Families Are Special, Tango Makes Three, Best Colors. There's many that can be looked up, and just by putting in the words family diversity into a search.
Mm-hmm. And what about from the educator's perspective? So, let's say there's not immediate availability of some training or workshop session or something like this. If I wanted to go online to find out more information, maybe about terminology or this topic generally, any ideas about where I should go?
Absolutely. There have actually been some incredible resources that pertain more to the early childhood education field, which makes me really happy because in the past I was never seeing anything for early education, only for school-age teachers. So some current websites or organizations to contact would be Rainbow Health Ontario. They have an excellent resource called Building Bridges, and that is written for early childhood educators. And there's so many incredible ideas in there, just different ways of thinking about how to be inclusive, and it'll really broaden people's minds, I believe. Also, the Toronto District School Board has also an LGBTQ inclusive curriculum, and ECEs are fantastic at adapting activities. So a lot of their activities can be adapted for younger children. Also, a program out of Kitchener-Waterloo, it's called Okay to Be Me, which is a counseling service for LGBTQ youth and their families. and they also have a support group and social group for those kids. But on their website, they have resources for both children, youth, and for parents and teachers as well. Another really great website is called GLISTEN. It's the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network. And any of these websites would be a great starting point.
What's the website URL for GLISTEN?
I believe it's just www.glsen, and I believe it's .org.
Now, let's say I'm the director of a childcare program and we are inclusive of LGBTQ families and just inclusive generally for all families. And I want to make it clear to anyone who visits our center that we're inclusive of LGBTQ families. What is there something that I can display or show, really easily and quickly that we are inclusive?
Absolutely. The most common symbol for the LGBTQ community that people would recognize right away would be the rainbow flag. Now, rainbow flag, there are little window decals that can be purchased. I know this can be done online, but also there is a store in Toronto called Out on the Street, and they sell them as well. I think, again, contacting the Pride Committee of your home city, they would also be able to help find any stickers or window decals of the sort. But the rainbow flag is very common. Another decal that can be used is All Families Matter, and I've seen that one, and it's all in rainbow colors as well, so people will know what you're talking about. But the rainbow definitely is the most common.
Got it. Gender diversity is a complex topic, and especially in the context of an early childhood educator and in that setting. If you were to give a simple message that ECEs could carry with them about gender diversity that would make a difference, what would that be?
I think that children need to be affirmed for whatever gender choices that they make. We need to create an environment where children can express gender as they like, and where we don't make assumptions about the meaning of children's behavior or choices. I think people need to keep in mind that gender behavior may or may not be indicative of an LGBTQ identity later in life. Okay, I've had many parents be really upset at pickup. For instance, here's a very typical one, and it saddens me to still see this. A father or a mother being upset that their son is playing in the dramatic play area with babies. Or, they say, oh, he's always playing with those girls and those babies, and sometimes even is dressed up in the clothes that we don't like a dress. And I think, and I haven't asked specifically, but I do believe parents fear that their child will grow up to be gay if they're doing that. But I tend to tell my parents, without getting into that topic, I just say, you know what? He is acting out what he sees at home, and he's going to grow up to be a wonderful father someday if he chooses. He in our dramatic play area, that's where children express what's going on for them in their life. And he's being loving to babies right now. It's probably going to be very indicative of him growing up to be a fabulous parent. So good for you. That's what I would tell a parent.
Yeah.
But gender expression really isn't black and white, even for those who identify as gay.
Yeah.
Can I add something else in there, Ron?
Absolutely.
I want educators to be really thinking about how restricting it is to be forced into a box. And here's a perfect example. How often do educators still ask all the boys to line up at the door and then all the girls to line up at the door? I have this little secret for you, Ron, and for anyone listening. The children may not have decided their gender yet. That's a little mind-blowing to think about. But it's up to them. It's their bodies. And we shouldn't be giving them all these messages all through their early years about what gender that they are, because they may not have decided.
And I guess what role does an early childhood educator play in having these conversations with parents who are uncomfortable with these topics? Like, do you think that they should take, more of a leadership role in having these conversations, or should they sort of leave it up to the families?
hmm I think, Ron, anyone who would express discomfort or could be visibly upset that this is being talked about in our classrooms, I think that it's almost beyond the job of the ECE. I think at that point, if a parent is that upset, that they be sent to the administrator of the childcare,
Hmm.
only because I think the situation quite likely cannot be resolved in a short conversation.
Right.
Do you know, when I was holding a workshop, I actually had one ECE tell me that, and she was a supervisor of a center. She said that one family ended up leaving the center because they weren't happy with LGBTQ topic at all being talked about in the classroom. And you know what? I looked at that administrator and I said, you know what? That's okay. It's
Right.
totally okay that they left because they knew what they were signing up for when they enrolled, and this will make space for someone who will be accepting and welcoming to any like to diverse people. So it just wasn't a good fit. And there could be we don't, like I said earlier, we're not trying to change anybody's own beliefs, and that would be for an educator themselves or the parents. But if you're enrolled in an organization, then you do need to follow the philosophy of the center.
Yeah, and that's what I think is really a key part of your message is that it's not specific to anybody or anyone. You are just being inclusive generally within your early years program, and you're giving children the right to non-discriminate environment. And I think that's a really great way to think about it is again, you're not being looking at things from an individual's perspective. You're just saying, as a childcare program, we're inclusive for all families or anything else. And I think awesome. And now here's a couple questions that I like to ask everybody before we wrap things up. I know you mentioned a couple specific sources where people could go. Any other sources that we missed where you go to get information about early childhood education generally or LGBTQ families in early childhood education? Is there anything we missed there?
When I was creating Rainbow Families Visibility in the early years, I was looking for other large cities in Canada who may also have an early childhood educator doing the same kind of workshop, and I couldn't find anything. So this is true that this topic is not being talked about enough for early childhood education. Where this is where I'm telling everyone this is where the seeds of acceptance should be planted. So I will say that in Ontario, I do travel as well, but my workshop can be found through www.secrett with two T's events.com. And my workshop really does talk about current terminology in a very playful way. And it does look through, or it has early childhood educators really looking at case scenarios and how to embrace teachable moments within their childcare. So it tries to keep things nice and light. And I have found that every single time I present it, educators go away feeling a lot more comfortable with the topic. And that's where we want people. We want to feel that that there are a lot of allies out in the world, and that that children are getting those seeds of acceptance nice and early in life.
Wonderful. And maybe also a call to action to all the other people out there that are passionate about this subject to do training or workshops as well. Like if you're in the US and a specific city and you're looking up for these kind of resources locally and they don't exist, I think that's a great opportunity.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, the more we talk about this, the more I see it is very important to address. Now, last question.
Yeah.
What excites you most about early childhood education right now?
What excites me most? You know what? I think it's true. I'm not sure if it's about right now, but the learning never ends. It just never ends. I think right now there is a huge change in people's perception of the field, and a lot of growth has been happening with advocacy, just having our work seen as valuable and being paid properly for that as well.
In your time in early childhood education, would you say that the pace of learning has increased in recent years?
I think it depends on the actual like individual early childhood educator, how passionate they are about the field and how much learning that they want to do. Because the amount of conferences, workshops, PD events that are out there for ECEs just shows me that people are so passionate about what they do. So really, doesn't matter what city you're in the U.S. or Canada. If you are working as an early childhood educator, what excites me the most is that the learning opportunities, the professional development opportunities are so vast on any topic in the field. And just keep learning is my advice, because in the end, it only helps the children.
Totally. And this is something that's come up before, which I think is a very good point, is as an early childhood educator, you control your own destiny. And like you said, there's lots of resources out there. And if you want to go and find out more, learn more, expand your base of knowledge, it's all up to you, and you can go out there and do it. The information's there, the opportunities are there. So I think that's a really great point to finish on. Shelley, thanks so much for coming on the show. It was really great having you. This is a super important topic, and I think you speak very wisely about it. So thanks again for coming on the show.
Ron, thank you so much for having me. Seriously, I do feel very strong about this topic, and I'm happy to share it with your listeners.
What's your name?
Michaela.
Michaela. How are you?
Hi.
You having fun playing?
Yes.
It's a nice day, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes. What's your favorite thing to play out here?
Playing monsters.
You like to play monsters? Do you like the swings? Okay. What else you like to do?
Play my Dora bike.
Oh, with your Dora bike? Oh, okay. Do you ride fast?
Yep.
Yep. Okay. Well, have fun here. All right.